The scent of lavender and old books filled the air as Margaret folded the last of her cardigans into a worn suitcase. Her once steady hands trembled, not from age, but from the weight of betrayal. The sun filtered through lace curtains, casting soft patterns across the walls of the home she had built with her late husband, George. Every corner of that house whispered memories, laughter, arguments, birthdays, and the quiet comfort of decades gone by. And now she was being forced to leave it all behind. "Mom?" Michael's voice called from the hallway. "Emma's waiting in the car." Margaret turned slowly, her eyes resting on her son, her only child. His expression was uneasy, his shoulders slumped beneath invisible guilt. She wanted to believe he was unaware of what was happening, but deep down she knew he was complicit. Behind him stood Emma, sharp, polished, and smiling that calculated smile that never reached her eyes. "Everything's packed?" Emma asked briskly, glancing around as if inspecting a piece of property she already owned. Margaret's lips trembled. "A nursing home? I thought I was just staying there for a few days, until the house renovations were done." Emma's smile didn't falter. "Oh, Margaret, it'll be much better for you there. Safer. You'll have people to talk to. You can't live alone anymore." "I've lived alone just fine for 10 years, Margaret whispered, clutching her suitcase handle tighter. "This is my home, Emma. George and I." Emma's tone hardened. "George is gone, and you're not capable of taking care of this place anymore." Michael finally stepped forward. "Mom, it's just temporary," he said softly, not meeting his eyes. "Emma thinks, well, we think it's what's best for you." "What's best for me?" she thought bitterly. "Or what's best for you two?" Margaret didn't argue. She simply nodded, straightened her posture, and walked out the door. Her chest ached as she crossed the threshold. The garden she and George had planted together swayed in the autumn breeze, petals fluttering like a final goodbye. As the car pulled away, she looked back one last time. Her house, her sanctuary, grew smaller and smaller until it vanished behind the trees. The nursing home was everything she feared. Clean, quiet, efficient, but cold, too quiet. The hallways smelled of bleach and loneliness. Each room looked identical, a beige box where time seemed to stop. Her roommate, Helen, a kind widow with silver hair and twinkling eyes, tried to comfort her. "First weeks are the hardest," she said. "You'll settle in." Margaret smiled weakly. "I don't plan to stay that long." At night, she lay awake, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of someone crying down the hall. Her chest felt heavy, a mix of sorrow and disbelief. How could her own son, the boy she raised with love and sacrifice, do this? One afternoon, as she sat in the small garden outside the fence, she overheard a conversation near the fence. A young woman, Emma's voice, undoubtedly sharp, was on the phone. "Yes, the house is in our name now. The realtor's coming next week. Once it's sold, we'll finally have enough for the new place." Margaret froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Our name? Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. That couldn't be true. She and George owned the house outright. The deed was in her name. They couldn't just take it, could they? When Emma's voice faded, Margaret turned her face to the sun, her eyes burning not from the light, but from fury. Days turned into weeks. Margaret played the role of the frail, compliant old woman, nodding through Emma's fake concern and Michael's hollow apologies, but inside she was plotting. She'd raised a family. She'd managed a business with George. She knew how to stay calm, observe, and wait for the right moment. Her chance came when a kind nurse named Leah took notice of her. "You're too quiet, Margaret," Leah said one afternoon as she adjusted her pillow. "You don't seem like the others. Something's on your mind, isn't it?" Margaret studied her. Leah was young, maybe in her 20s, with kind brown eyes that reminded her of her younger self. "Do you ever feel like people assume they know what's best for you?" she asked. Leah smiled faintly. "Every day." That was the beginning of their friendship. Over the next few weeks, Margaret opened up bit by bit. About her late husband, about her home, about the betrayal. Leah listened, eyes widening with disbelief. "They can't sell your house like that," Leah said one night. "It's illegal unless you signed it over." "That's just it," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "I didn't. I never would." Leah's brows furrowed. "Then how do they have it?" Margaret looked down. "That's what I intend to find out." The next morning, during computer activity time, Leah quietly rolled a laptop cart into Margaret's room. "You've got 15 minutes, she whispered. Her fingers hovered uncertainly over the keyboard. It had been years since she'd typed, but her determination steadied her hands. She opened the real estate website and froze. There it was, her home, for sale. Fresh photos of her kitchen, her living room, her beloved garden. It felt like seeing her life displayed in a stranger's window. The realtor's name read Daniel Reeves, Elmwood Realty Group. Margaret scribbled it down on a napkin. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, she slipped out to the nurse's station phone and dialed his number. After 2 rings, a warm male voice answered. "Daniel Reeves speaking." "Mr. Reeves," she began, her voice quivering but strong. "My name is Margaret Thompson. I believe you're selling a property that belongs to me, 14 Elmwood Drive." A pause. "Yes, ma'am, that's listed under Michael and Emma Thompson." Her heart sank. "They're my son and daughter-in-law, but that house, it's mine. My husband and I bought it 40 years ago." Daniel's tone softened. "Do you have any documents that prove ownership?" "They're in the house, in my desk drawer, but I'm not allowed back there." "Ma'am," he said after a pause, "if the signatures were forged, we might still be able to help. I'll look into it." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're the first person who's listened." That night, she didn't sleep. The rage that had been quietly burning inside her was now a steady fire. They thought she was weak, they thought she was done, but she was just getting started.
The next few days passed in quiet tension. Margaret went through her routine at the nursing home. Breakfast, group therapy, evening tea, but her mind was elsewhere. Each night she replayed her conversation with the realtor, Daniel Reeves, word for word. Could he really help her? Or was this just another false hope? On the 5th morning, a nurse entered her room. "Mrs. Thompson, you have a visitor." Margaret's heart skipped. Visitors were rare. Her son hadn't come in weeks. When she stepped into the small visiting room, Daniel stood waiting, holding a brown folder and looking both curious and concerned. "Mr. Reeves?" she greeted softly. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, shaking her hand. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced, but I found something unusual." He opened the folder. Inside was a photocopy of a property transfer form. "This is the document that changed ownership from you to your son-in-law and daughter-in-law." Margaret leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "That's my name," she said, pointing to the bottom. Then she froze. The signature was neat, confident, and completely wrong. "I didn't sign that," she whispered. Daniel nodded grimly. "That's what I thought. The date of the transfer was 6 months ago, and the notary listed has been under investigation for fraud. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Margaret's heart pounded. "If we prove it's forged, can I get my house back?" He nodded. "Yes, but we'll need the original deed, and that means finding it." Margaret looked out the window. The autumn leaves were falling outside, the world still turning while her life had been paused. "The deed is in my old writing desk, top drawer, beneath a stack of letters," she said finally. Daniel frowned. "That house is locked now. They're preparing for an open house. I can get in, she said suddenly, surprising even herself. That evening, she confided in Leah, her young nursing ally. Leah's eyes widened as she heard the plan. Mrs. Thompson, you can't just sneak out of a nursing home. Margaret smiled faintly. Who's going to stop me? The night nurse who falls asleep by 9? Leah bit her lip. You really mean it, don't you? I've spent my life following rules. Now, I'm following my heart. After a moment of hesitation, Leah nodded. Then I'm coming with you. Saturday arrived, and the nursing home bus was scheduled for its weekly community day. Leah hooked Margaret onto the bus with a clipboard and a smile, making it look perfectly ordinary. The driver thought nothing of it. They were supposed to visit the local park, but when the bus stopped at a red light near Elmwood Drive, Margaret whispered, "Now." Leah helped her out quietly. The driver never noticed 2 small figures slip into the side street. The neighborhood was just as Margaret remembered. Maple trees lined the sidewalks, and children played in the yards. But as she turned the corner and saw her house, her breath caught. It was different now. The curtains were drawn, the garden unkempt, and the porch, her husband's favorite spot, was cluttered with "for sale" signs. Margaret walked up the steps, her cane clicking softly against the wood. She lifted the flower pot by the front door, and there it was, the old spare key, still tucked beneath. She turned it in the lock. The door opened with a soft click. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the faint scent of fresh paint. Her heart squeezed as she stepped onto the familiar wooden floorboards. Everything was the same, yet wrong. The family photos were gone. Her quilt was missing from the couch. Even the ticking clock that George had fixed countless times was silent. She made her way to the study, her breath quickening. Her old writing desk stood by the window, sunlight falling across it like a spotlight. Her hands trembled as she opened the drawer. Bills, letters, and faded photographs filled the space. But then, beneath the envelope, she saw the corner of a thick, yellow document. "The deed!" she breathed. She pulled it out, unfolding the fragile paper. There it was, Margaret L. Thompson and George R. Thompson, in bold ink. The official seal glinted faintly under the sunlight. Tears welled in her eyes. "George, we did it," she whispered. But before she could fold the paper, a voice cut through the silence. "What are you doing here?" Margaret turned. Emma stood in the doorway, shock flashing across her face before it hardened into fury. "I came to take back what's mine," Margaret said calmly. "You have no right to be here." "No right?" Margaret stepped forward, her frail frame seeming to grow taller. "You forged my signature. You stole my home. You lied to my son." Emma's face paled. "You don't know what you're talking about." Daniel's voice came from behind her. "Actually, she does." Both women turned. Daniel stood in the doorway, holding up his phone, the screen recording their entire exchange. Emma's expression twisted. "You set me up." Daniel shrugged. "No, you set yourself up." Margaret's chest heaved with adrenaline. "You tried to erase me," she said quietly. "But I'm still here." Emma glared, her lips curling. "You'll regret this, old woman." "I already regret letting you into my family," Margaret replied softly. At that moment, the strength of years filled her. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and pushed aside, but she had never been powerless. Daniel called the police. Emma tried to leave, but they arrived within minutes. When they escorted her out, Margaret stood at the window, the deed clutched in her hand, the weight of justice finally beginning to lift the years off her shoulders. Later that night, Daniel drove her back to the nursing home. Neither spoke much. The silence said enough. When they arrived, he turned to her and said quietly, "You know, you could press charges. Full prosecution." Margaret looked out the window. "No," she said. "Let her live with what she's done. That'll be punishment enough." Daniel smiled softly. "You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Thompson." She returned the smile. "I just remembered who I was."
The next few weeks were a whirlwind of police reports, signatures, and legal meetings. The forgery case had been filed. The stolen property documents were seized. And Margaret's quiet world in the nursing home became the center of a brewing scandal.
One afternoon, she sat in the lounge, sunlight glimmering through the window. Leah joined her with a cup of tea. "They're saying your daughter-in-law confessed," Leah whispered. Margaret looked up slowly. "Confessed?" Leah nodded. "She said she only did it because your son was drowning in debt. She thought selling the house would save them." Margaret exhaled, closing her eyes. "Save them by destroying me," she murmured. "What kind of salvation is that?" But Leah placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes people show who they are when they're desperate. You showed who you are when you were strong." Margaret smiled faintly. "You're wise for your age." Leah laughed softly. "You're fierce for yours." The court hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Daniel arrived at the nursing home early that morning to escort Margaret to the courthouse. He brought her a dark blue coat and a pearl brooch. "Thought you might like to look like the woman who owned half the block," he said with a grin. Margaret chuckled, pinning the brooch. "Thank you, Daniel, but I don't need to look powerful. Today, I just need to be it." The courthouse steps loomed tall, but Margaret climbed them with quiet determination. Inside, whispers spread like wildfire as people recognized her, the elderly woman who'd exposed a family fraud. Emma sat at the defendant's table, eyes downcast, her usual arrogance replaced by shame. Michael sat beside her, pale and exhausted. When the judge entered, silence fell. The case began. Daniel presented the evidence, the forged deed, the notary's confession, and the recorded conversation where Emma admitted her crime. Margaret watched every second in silence, her heart both breaking and healing at once. When the judge called her to the stand, she rose slowly, gripping her cane like a staff. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Mrs. Thompson," the judge said, "in your own words, tell us what happened." She took a deep breath. "My husband and I built that house 50 years ago. Every brick, every flower in that garden was part of our life together. When he passed, that home was all I had left of him." Her voice trembled but did not break. "I trusted my son and his wife to care for it. Instead, they took it from me and sent me away like an unwanted memory." The room was still. Even the sound of pens scratching had stopped. "I'm not here for revenge," she continued. "I'm here to remind people that trust is sacred and that age doesn't mean weakness. I may be old, but I am not invisible." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson." When Margaret returned to her seat, Daniel gave her a subtle thumbs up. After closing statements, the judge read his verdict. "The evidence is clear. The property transfer was fraudulent. The rightful ownership of 214 Elmwood Drive is hereby returned to Mrs. Margaret L. Thompson. Furthermore, Mrs. Emma Thompson is sentenced to community service and restitution of damages." Emma gasped, covering her mouth. Michael dropped his head into his hands. Margaret sat still, tears pooling in her eyes, not from victory, but from relief. She had won back more than a house. She had won back her name. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. "Mrs. Thompson, how does it feel to get justice? Do you forgive your daughter-in-law? Will you move back into your home?" Margaret smiled gently, her voice calm and steady. "Justice isn't about taking something back. It's about standing up when everyone expects you to sit down." Daniel helped her into his car, and as they drove away, she turned to watch the courthouse fade in the rearview mirror. "Back home?" he asked. She hesitated. "Not yet. I think I'll visit the house one last time before deciding." The golden afternoon light bathed Elmwood Drive as they arrived. The house was quiet now, empty, waiting. Margaret stepped out and walked slowly up the familiar path. The key fit perfectly in the lock.
Inside, the air carried that mix of dust and memory. She touched the wall, tracing the faint marks of where her husband's photos once hung. "You'd be proud of me, George," she whispered. Then she went to the backyard, where the rose bush he had planted still grew, stubborn, untamed, alive. Daniel watched her from the porch. "You're thinking about staying, aren't you?" She smiled. "No, I'm thinking about letting go." He frowned softly. "Letting go? I fought for this house to prove something. That I mattered, that my voice still counts. But now that I've proven it, I don't need these walls to remind me who I am." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding. Margaret turned to face him. "Sell it," she said. "But this time, let's make sure the sale is honest." He smiled. "You're sure?" She nodded. "Completely." A month later, the house was sold to a young couple with 2 children, a family ready to fill it with laughter again. Margaret attended the closing, signing the papers with her own steady hand. As she handed Daniel the pen, she said, "I built memories here. Now it's someone else's turn." He smiled warmly. "You've closed one door, but I think a lot of new ones are about to open." Margaret chuckled. "Maybe I'll finally write that book I always talked about." Leah, who had joined them for lunch after, raised her glass of lemonade. "To Mrs. Thompson, the woman who proved that age has nothing to do with courage." Margaret laughed, her heart full. "To second chances," she said, clinking glasses. That night, back in her nursing home room, she sat by the window looking at the stars. For the first time in years, she felt free. Her husband's photograph sat on the table beside her. She smiled at it softly. "You always said home isn't a place, it's a feeling. You were right, George. You always were." The camera of life pulled back, showing the old woman silhouetted in moonlight, peaceful, proud, and whole again.
A few quiet weeks passed after the court case ended. The media frenzy faded, the neighborhood gossip settled, and Margaret's life found a calm rhythm once again. Yet inside her, a new awareness had taken root, the kind that only comes after surviving a storm. At the nursing home, she no longer felt like a forgotten soul tucked away from the world. Staff greeted her with newfound respect, and even other residents began to look at her differently, not as a fragile old woman, but as someone who had fought back and won. One afternoon, Leah brought her a surprise. It was a printed article from a local newspaper. The headline read, "Elderly Woman Outsmarts Forgery Scheme, a Story of Courage and Truth." Leah grinned as Margaret read the story aloud, her voice trembling with pride and disbelief. "They actually called me courageous," she whispered, smiling faintly. "You are courageous. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for everyone who's ever been silenced." Margaret looked out the window at the blooming garden outside. "I used to think growing old meant losing power. Now I see it means gaining perspective." That evening, Margaret sat with a small notebook in her lap. She began writing letters, not to her son or daughter-in-law, but to herself. Letters of forgiveness, reflection, and release. The first read, "Dear Margaret, you did not lose your family. You lost their truth. You did not lose your home. You found your strength. You were not a victim. You are a survivor." She paused, tears touching the edges of her smile. For the first time, she didn't write to fix the past. She wrote to thank herself for enduring it. A few days later, Daniel came by with some unexpected news. "He got a call from your son," he said softly. "Michael. He wants to see you." Margaret's pen froze mid-sentence. "After everything?" "He said he's sorry. He said Emma's gone. She left him, took the car, the money, everything she could. He said he's lost." Margaret closed her notebook and stared out the window. "Lost," she repeated. "Sometimes we have to lose everything before we realize what we had." Daniel nodded. "Will you see him?" She thought for a moment, then sighed.
Yes, but not as the mother he remembers, as the woman I've become. 2 days later, Michael arrived at the nursing home. He looked thinner, older, a shadow of his former self. His eyes were red, his voice cracked. "Mom," he said quietly, "I don't know where to start." "Then don't start," she replied gently. "Just sit." He sat beside her, silence stretching between them. The ticking of the clock filled the space where words once lived. "I didn't know she was doing it," he said finally. "Not at first. By the time I found out, it was too late. I should have stopped her. I should have protected you." Margaret looked at him, her expression soft but firm. "You were supposed to protect your marriage, Michael, not destroy your mother for it." He dropped his head into his hands. "I was weak." She reached out, her aged fingers brushing his. "We all are sometimes. The question is, what do we do after weakness?" He looked up, eyes glistening. "Can you forgive me?" Margaret took a long breath. The years of pain, betrayal, and longing swirled in her chest like a storm ready to calm. "I already have," she said. "Forgiveness isn't for you. It's for me. I can't carry this anger forever. It's too heavy." He covered her hand with his and wept quietly. For the first time in years, Margaret didn't feel like a victim or even a victor. She felt free. Weeks turned into months, and Margaret's story continued to ripple through the community. A local women's group invited her to speak about elder rights and the importance of legal awareness. Standing at the podium, her hands steady on the microphone, she began, "We grew up thinking strength means lifting others, but true strength," she paused, smiling, "means standing up when no one's there to hold your hand." The audience erupted in applause. Several women stood, tears in their eyes, nodding as if her words reached into their own hidden wounds. Margaret felt something shift inside her, the transformation from pain to purpose. That evening, Leah helped her pack for a short vacation. She said, "You deserve to see more than these walls." Margaret chuckled. "Where are we going?" "Anywhere you want. The world's open again." Margaret looked at the small suitcase on her bed, a symbol of everything she once thought she'd lost. "Then let's see the ocean," she said with a smile. "It's been too long since I heard something stronger than silence." On the pier, days later, the sea breeze tousled her silver hair. She stood by the railing, the horizon endless before her. She whispered, "You were right, George. Home isn't a house, it's peace." A tear rolled down her cheek, but it wasn't from sorrow, it was gratitude. Behind her, Leah snapped a photo, the kind of moment that captures not beauty, but strength.
In the end, justice didn't just return a house, it returned dignity. She was forced out, forgotten, underestimated, yet she proved that even the quietest hearts can roar when truth is on their side. Remember, sometimes life takes everything from you, only to give you yourself back.